Hello and welcome to the Dyer's Cast, a show that's so on form that we start as Lloyd walks away from his computer to retrieve some water. With us today is the fine and mighty Jeff Doty from Encounterbalance. Say hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Aha!
Got him.
Oh, you got me with a
Classic guy.
zinger. Oh my good God, that is a classic line. So Lloyd's gone to get some water.
I'm ashamed of myself.
Don't be, man. Don't be. We've all done it. We all have to leap upon these opportunities. How's your day been, man?
It's been pretty good. Had a bit of an early morning. Went to an interview for a job. But other than that, it's been a relaxing day after that. So I'm just hanging out.
It's cool, man. And quite exactly the opposite. I had my last day on the production that I've been performing in since June, July. So that was interesting.
Oh wow!
Yeah. I don't have to continually learn Shakespeare every day. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great, and I now know lots and lots of Shakespeare. But at the same time, I'm now happy that I can learn other things that aren't Shakespeare.
Yeah, anything like that's always a double-edged sword. It's like you spend all this time working on like one thing and it can be super cool, but at the same time eventually it's like there's a lot else that I would also like to do with my life, please.
That's it. My life basically consisted of doing that and performing that and then running games here and occasionally seeing my friends, but that was very occasional. Oh, did I hear the sound of a returning Jarl?
Hello.
Oh, here he is. He finally deigns to show up. Say hi, Lloyd.
Hi, Lloyd. Welcome to my
You
YouTube channel.
Did it too. Welcome to your own YouTube channel.
Yep.
So here on the Dyer's Cast, we ask people to bloody whack in questions into the chat, the live chat that you'll find next to this very live stream. Put question in front of your question if you want to ask a question, and we will tackle it. We ask this so we can see it and get to it more quickly and efficiently.
It's great to have lots of people chatting in the chat, but it also means that questions get lost very quickly. It makes it very hard to find anything. We like to be organized here at the Dyer's Cast. This is not some ramshackle operation.
It's not something that we fly by on the seat of our pants all the time. No,
it's scheduled for weeks. We've all done our research. I hope we've done our homework.
The person who is responsible for starting the broadcast is there at the start of the broadcast.
Exactly. Yep.
We've got everything in line.
Yep. You'd never guess I was an improv teacher, would you? Starting the broadcast and then leaving you to it, like. Just throw you in the deep end. Don't think, just do.
Yes, just think. Oh, what was the game that we were talking about before? The that Boing.
Boing, yeah.
Yeah, we'll play that later. For now, though, we'll talk about other games that we've been playing. Get that segue, boys.
Jesus Christ. I think I know.
I know. I feel wretched already. We're going to talk about some games, and then we're going to answer some questions, and then maybe talk about some other games we've been in.
Yep.
Good to have Jeff with us as well, as Jeff is basically in all of those games as well. So, like, that's fine. Which one should we start with?
Let's go in chronological order.
Okay.
I don't know which one happened first. Was it Lore Keepers? Are we talking about Lore Keepers on this?
It was a while ago. I mean, we can if you like.
That's the longest ago of the various games that I've played in that you are in.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the only thing that is to be said for that session was really we're getting to the point where it's the, and I did a stream about this before, so I don't mind it. We can skim over this one, to be honest, because I have spoken about it before. Okay. But we are sort of reaching the third act of Lore Keepers, and I was really, really keen to get to the point where, you know, you've kind of accumulated a lot of forces, and now you can start thinking about how you're going to use them. I didn't think to do this, but Locris did a random thing where he pulled up the rough draft of the map that I'd drawn towards the sort of second half of the session and started using that to sort of consider, you know, where you're going to move those forces and stuff like that. I guess like it's a more hands-off approach, but after a while, like once you have all those pieces, like you've got to say, well, how do you want to achieve your goals? Like I can't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. I think it has to become less zoomed in, right, for the game to work at that stage. Like,
yeah.
Or else, what's the point in getting all those allies? And we talked this about at the end of Against the Shadow as well. Like, what's the point in doing that and then not having the battle, you know? And then just being like, okay, there's a battle happening in the background and you guys are doing something else. Like, why go through all that hassle in the first place, acquiring friends and allies to not use them?
Yeah, I think and this is going to be a running theme of this session because we're going to be talking a lot about war, but I mean, the Law Keepers are preparing to go into full out like war mode against Advent and the forces of the God King. So yeah, that is a very good point. Like most when mass combat and war is spoken of, like a lot of the advice that I hear given is exactly the zoomed in. You've got to like achieve an objective within the battle,
yeah,
and not focus on the entirety of it. But is there something lost from that? What do you think, Joe?
I'd say that there kind of is actually, yeah. I understand why that's commonly the advice given, like because most people don't run a lot of combats and most players don't necessarily look for that as the focus. But I think if you are going to do it, like when you zoom in and have like the players just do specific objectives, you kind of lose out on the feel of like the overall battle, I think. You kind of lose out on some of the strategy aspects of it, looking at it from a game perspective. And I think you also kind of lose out on some of that feeling of like, this is a huge thing that's happening everywhere. If you only focus in on one spot.
I think that there's opportunities, although it's a lot of work, to like run a battle properly as if it's an actual strategy battle. You could run it like a Total War. Like you'd need to use Roll20 probably, or like some sort of online tabletop. But you know, you could kind of. I think that for me, I would lose my shit. I would love that. I don't know how much everyone else would love that though, you know. And I think it's the kind of thing that's very liable for quarterbacking, you know, where like one person, which would be me, is like shouting very loudly and like, no, move those guys over here. And that's potentially a problem there for sure.
I think what's important is you take into account the characters. So say, for example, we look at Against the Shadow with Faroth or Cyneric, perhaps people that are sort of tactically minded and have fought, maybe not all out wars, but like, you know, they have that knowledge about them. Or like Marius and Law Keepers or whatever, like it's part of their character that they know that kind of stuff, and they relish in the fact that they can be tactical and can outthink the enemy. So I think that that's nothing but an opportunity to let your players, I guess, have fun with that and start playing around, because then it's kind of like you if your character strategically attack people in a dungeon, like it's no different. It's just Zoom telling you and the players are telling all of the NPCs what to do in the fight. I think that's really cool, and I personally, like, war is not always necessarily a quick thing, so you don't have to sort of like breeze through it.
Yeah, I think that there's like a general thought process that like combat should be quick, that it's fine to spend an hour talking, as in like in character conversation, but you want to try and rush through combat as quickly as you can and not have it be bogged down. I think that's generally good advice. I think that D&D combat gets boring after you're talking 5 rounds before I think it loses its and that's at a maximum. I think you got 5 rounds before combat becomes like, and I make another attack, yeah, and he makes another attack, you know. But go ahead.
I was going to say, which is interesting because I think that is entirely dependent on the style of which you're playing, because I've been in games where I've sat around a table, for instance, with a grid, and I've enjoyed that that's lasted well over 5 rounds. Like we're going into 10 rounds, that kind of thing, where you've just got waves of enemies and stuff, and it's like a battle of attrition.
Yeah.
I think it's harder to retain in Theatre of the Mind, and I think that's why the need for pacing in Theatre of the Mind is much more important than it is on a grid.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah,
and it depends.
I'd agree with that. I think another misconception too is the idea that a full war has to be like just a combat encounter. Like if you're talking war on the scale of that large, like yeah, if you just roll initiative and just go around and around and around in a combat circle for, you know, hours, then yeah, that's going to get boring. But war is so much more than just the people fighting. Like there's so many strategical elements. Like you can bring in things like skill challenges, you can bring in like role play encounters, and like there's so much that you can do with the planning and like the execution of it. That's not just I'm rolling attack rolls against opponents. And I think that's kind of a missed opportunity a lot in large scale battle, is they just make it a fight instead of like an experience.
That was a really profound answer. A fight rather than experience. I like that answer, man. That's good. I'm sure I know I probably speak for Lloyd with this, but like I really enjoyed the role playing encounters when you're all stood around a table looking at a map. We could do this, or no, maybe we could do this, and we're being smart. Like with the Isklof game, I felt really rewarded because I was like, hey Phelan, what if you drop me and a bunch of men off, and then we circle around the town and attack them from the north while you attack them from the bay? It's only a simple military maneuver, but it still had an effect in the game. And because of that cool conversation, like it resulted in a rad battle where we kicked ass, you know?
Yeah, it's like decision making gone macro, right? Like you make a decision and it affects not just your party, but it affects like thousands of lives potentially when you're planning a battle, you know? And that's satisfying. Okay, so what was that? Lore Keepers?
Yeah. The only other thing I was going to say to that is that, I mean, we speak of, you know, in general throughout role-playing games, most people will say, oh, they want their decisions and their choices to matter and stuff. I think, adding to what you were saying there, Lloyd, like, that's like instant gratification, your decisions having an impact because you're deciding what you're going to do, and then instantly the combat starts.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, we're gonna trick this merchant and then like 10 sessions later we're gonna go back to the same shop and then the repercussions happen. No, it's like immediate sort of like you see what happens. So there's that to add too. But yeah, Lore Keepers is getting to that stage where the strategy is going to become more and more prevalent, which I'm kind of excited for. I'm very excited for. But then the next game, I mean, I can't even remember what order they've been in.
No.
Let's talk about Fantasy Flight, because
let's.
I got a message from Lloyd. We were talking we were talking and we hadn't got anything to do that evening, I think. And we're like, oh, let's do something. And I was like, oh, maybe I should run something with Nine Kingdoms or whatever. And then Lloyd was like, oh, let's do Fantasy Flight. And I was like, no, because I'm not comfortable with the system. Despite the fact that I've already been in 2 very enjoyable games that Lloyd had run for Fantasy Flight, the Neo Crusaders, where we were Mandalorians. But I was like, yeah. And I found myself having to sort of like eat that attitude after the game because I had a really, really good time. And that dice roller thing was even better than the one that was in the Hangouts box. I mean, I should learn what they mean because I don't know what those mean, but I still had a rad time doing it. Let's talk about that game for a bit then.
It was tricky to GM because I didn't do much prep and it was a heist, right? And I feel like the heist game is similar to the investigation game in that you need to kind of know what's going on in the area, right? So I should have, I think, no, I don't think the game went badly. I think it went really well, but it could have. I think what I should have done, and maybe what you should do in this situation, is think of like the obvious approaches the PCs will take to score the heist, and then think of what the reaction of the place would be. Because I feel like you got out of there, like there was a fight in the place, alarms are going off, and almost nobody did anything about it. And I feel like that's something that I was like, that's kind of weird. Why did that happen? And it's because I wasn't thinking on my feet and wasn't willing to like just have like wave after wave of dweebs come after you. And I felt like it was Star Wars, so it wouldn't happen that way anyway. but it's just something I thought about this sort of heist prep.
I think, to be honest with you, man, like it didn't feel that way to me. Like you left it open for us to do whatever we want, and we were kind of a bit slow on the uptake. Like I'll admit, like I was a bit sluggish in that game. I don't mind saying, like I know I was.
Same.
Not that I'm saying I'm like a tactical genius when it comes to heist anyway. Like, but I felt I didn't feel like out of place. Like to me, like it felt completely Star Warsy that we had to shoot our way out at the end. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like there was definitely a couple of times where we as the players weren't nearly as decisive and tactical as we could have been either. Like especially I think towards the start, like it kind of felt like, you know, when you can get in any way that you want to, sometimes that's more complicated than having only a limited option. Because it's like, okay, well, we're just supposed to go, but what can we even do? And like a lot of us are learning the system, so like knowing what we're capable of and what we're not is kind of up in the air. But something that I liked that you did a couple times throughout that session is like kept up in the side chat of just like giving people ideas and making sure people were comfortable with different things, which helped a lot. Just like, hey, well, maybe you guys can do this, or are you sure you're okay with how this scene is going? Or like, this is how this role or this skill might be used. Like the different little sidebars that you had in there made that game a lot easier, at least for me. And I would imagine for the others as well.
I think that, yeah, there was a tricky part in that game where Taylor was playing a female Togruta, and she was like a hacker, but then to get into the place, she like dressed up as a slave, and it was like a pleasure palace, and so there was implications there. And then she was like walking around on her own, and there was this like weak way, and the improv took a weird turn. And then I like cut away from it. I was like, oh, weird. That's kind of weird, and I don't know if that's like if that's okay to happen. You know, I wasn't sure if like this is all right. So like I messaged Taylor or whatever, and she was fine with it, and it didn't go that way anyway. But even so, it's kind of a weird thing, and I guess like that's the best practice is just like make sure people are okay with it before you have like a sexual assault in your game, you know, or whatever it is.
I mean, it wasn't so much. It wasn't even so much as it was more just an implied attitude from the merc. Like, and yeah, it was grimy, but like, I don't know. We played enough young games to sort of expect that people are going to be like the worst you can ever come across. And and look, I mean, we're talking about the worst people you can find in the Star Wars galaxy. Like, they're going to be pretty bad, right? I'm not saying that there are many sexual sort of advances made in Star Wars, but like for where we were, it made sense. Like, yeah, and
it's part of as I find in role-playing games, it doesn't come up. This thing that like literally is your main biological drive just doesn't appear in role-playing games because people are uncomfortable with it. They don't want to talk about it. They want to fade to black, and that's fine. But I also think that like such a huge part of being a human. And it's weird that it never comes up. So I'm trying to like include it more, but Jesus, it's weird to do so, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It can vary. Like there's a very fine line from where it goes from like not being at all in the game to being very useful and like adds a lot to the game. And there's that line between that and it being completely absurd and making everybody uncomfortable for no reason and no gain is like such a small. It takes only like the tiniest shift to take it over that edge.
Even
and that line is also different for every table and every person. So like it's very complicated.
Yep, that's for sure. And it's even a choice of words can like make a huge difference. You know, it's so tricky. But I don't know. I'll try and figure it out. Maybe we'll figure it out.
I mean, even when it comes to like, I mean, obviously we're talking about the negative side of that, but I think there's also the positive side, and that's something that I always try and allude to, at least. Like, with Lawkeepers, there's a character that's recently been brought into focus who is, it was implied that there was a previous relationship with Taylor's character, for example. With Vampire, there was kind of like a little bit of tension between Jeff's character and Cinder, like, it's implied and it's there, and you know that that's some, you know, a reason why a character would act a certain way, and I think that's enough. And you're right, like it's a human drive. I mean, obviously we're talking about vampires, and elves, but come on, it makes it relatable.
Yep, I just think it's the most normal thing that we make the weirdest thing, you know, and that's like true in real life also, you know, like it's also like something that people don't really talk about as much as they should and whatever else, but it is something that I've like noticed recently. I'm trying to include more in my games.
But back to Star Wars itself then. So despite it being like you say, Lloyd, like a low prep game, like I think we all sort of fell in love with the idea. I think we fell in love with the character relationships. They just seem to click really well. And then lo and behold, we have another campaign.
Yeah, it felt like lighting in a bottle, to be honest, because I really was planning on that being a one-shot, and it was structured like a one-shot, right? You get out of there, you do the thing, and then you're good. You get your pay or whatever. It went a little bit longer than I expected, and then because I'm me and I cannot resist, I put a moral quandary in there, and then bam, campaign. It's like, oh, God damn it. Like,
yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, my character said, like, to the Black Sun mercs, like, slavery is not a line that he's going to cross. Like, so he didn't know what they wanted with it. He said, oh, we're gonna obviously rescue the dancer, the Twi'lek. So he was like, oh, okay. And he believed him because he failed his check to see if the Black Sun dude was lying. But then obviously once we rescued her, she was like, no, they want me because I'm a Force-sensitive being and they're going to sell me to the Empire. So it was like, well, then obviously I've already written my character into a corner. Like he's not going to...
Right.
Like earlier in the game, like he said he wasn't going to stand for it. And he didn't. So there we go.
Yeah, the moment we found out like who this girl actually was, that like completely changed the implications of everything. Because like before that, we don't know. Like it could just be like somebody that like a family member or a former lover or whatever that they know and they just want her back or they want her free or whatever. And then we find out that she's Force sensitive, which of course completely changes everything about the nature of the mission, which complicated it.
Would you do anything different, Lloyd, to wrap Star Wars up, or is there anything that you're excited about going forward with it?
I don't think I would do anything differently. I think it went, like I kind of said, lightning in a bottle. I feel like it just was a one shot that struck me as particularly good and interesting, and like it worked out very well. I feel like in the last week I've had a week of really good games, like particularly good, and I'm really pleased with that. But that was one of them for sure. I was like, damn, that went really well. We are going to get Mike of Piper fame to come and join us.
Yes.
To play Zabara, who is the rescued Twi'lek Force user. So I've given him character information or character building information, and he'll be in soon. And I'm just really excited to run the system again. It's my favorite system, and playing it again, I remembered why. I was like, God damn, it's elegant, and fucking hell, it's just very good. Continuously through that game, I was like, oh, that mechanic, which I really liked. I'm excited by.
Yeah, that was actually only my second time ever playing the system in my life. I played one other game a couple months back. That was like a super short beginner level game. But I was very happy. Granted, I basically did none of the work. I just clicked roll, and then Lloyd would tell me what happened, which sped up the process a lot compared to me having to like define all these arcane symbols on the dice. But the results of the mechanics are very interesting, and I'm very keen to see more of the system in action. Now that I'm starting to get a feel for it, I really like it.
And there's a lot more to it as well in terms of like, you can make things, you can craft items, you can craft droids, you can get like it's really involved. And there's like lots of specific systems for things. Like there's a whole system for having a shootout, like a duel, like a two cowboys staring down or whatever. So there's all sorts of shit in there that's just like you wouldn't expect it to be, and almost all of it's very good, I think. So I'm really excited to get back into it and see how it goes.
And as much as I sort of protest about being unable to read the arcane symbols, as Jeff very, very rightly points out, it is weird. You just see these symbols, but then after a while of play, I was like, oh, I recognize that now. That's an advantage. Oh, that's a despair. So I think in time, like I'm going to pick it up, but as long as we have that wonderful app that was open where you could see what we were doing, and maybe if we can work out how to, because there was like an initiative bar in there as well, isn't there? Like you can put yourself into an initiative order in it,
and your hit points and your soak. You can put all your stuff in there, all this information. So you can basically have a character sheet open on that and then use it to roll dice and stuff, and you can change it all on it. I'm not too sure how, but I feel like there's a lot that you can do with that. Star Wars Fantasy Flight has some of the best support for a role-playing game in the world. There's a character generator called Ogdudes, and it's just the best. It does everything for you. It has all of the options. It's tremendous. And like that's how I learned to play that game. I played in like 2 games that Andrew Knapp ran, and then I just started making characters, and then I learned how to play the game via that. I was kind of stunned by that. So it's got really, really great resources.
And that fits the conversation, as this is the war stream. There was a war in the stars. Should we just get all of our games out of the way, then go to questions, or do you want to get them?
Yeah, let's get the games out of the way.
Okay, Jeff, have you run anything that we've not been in, or anything that you'd like to talk about at all?
Not super recently. Not in the scope of the time period that we're talking about. I have a couple games coming up. An Iscloft game in a couple weeks that should be super cool. But other than that,
I think what we should do,
just playing in all your guys' games. When in this last week and a half have I had a day that I could run a game instead of being in all your guys' stuff?
True, there's just no time. There's just no time. We'll have to do, Jeff, and obviously Lloyd, you'll have to. We'll just do another dice cast, and we'll do like an Iscloft thing, I think, because I'm also running my first ever Iscloft one shot soon.
Oh yes,
nice.
Which I'm excited for. I'm intimidated a little bit, but we'll go into that on that stream, I guess.
Yeah.
But as Iscloft is on the cards, why don't we talk about the game we played last night, Saga?
Sure. It was. I was really nervous going into that game because I couldn't prep for it. There was like nothing I could do to prepare because the issue and the blessing of a sandbox game is that you can't really do anything to prepare beyond knowing the setting, right? So, and I feel like I know Iscloft fairly well, but I also like it's about knowing the surroundings and like specifics, and that's like something that I'm not good with. I like to wing stuff, but then I can't really wing Icelandic names. That's something that I struggle with, which is I think reasonable, as I'm not Icelandic or a Viking from the Viking Age. But other than that, I couldn't really prep much for it. I had like one idea of how it would end, which was hopefully you going to that map place, but I feel like I wasn't pushing it as hard as the players were. And I did say at one stage, like, you can go wherever you want and do whatever you want. Like, I'm not relying on you going there. But then I felt like there was pressure to go there, and I was like, that's not what the feeling that I want. Like, you do what you want. It's tricky,
I tried so hard not to go to that damn map, but literally everybody was just giving me hell about it.
I was intrigued by it, but like I didn't push it as much. But I think the thing that I'd like to, I'm most interested in discussing about that session that we've just done is that we're starting to learn more and more about the different types of leadership that can occur within Iscloft, and I suppose in role-playing games in general. I suppose, but Iscloft, it's a rough time. And we talked about it briefly after the game, but I mean, it's good that you're here, Jeff, because we can ask you, like, Phelim, your character, he's the Carl. He's the one that has all the decisions thrust upon him. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that's been for you and, like, what you've been going through with that?
I mean, like, Saga is just by far and away the most difficult game that I play in. Like, it's the only game where I finish every single session consistently with just like my head swimming. Like, it's just so much everything. But I like it. That's not to say that that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing. But being in a position where normally in leadership positions in at least a lot of RPGs, less so with the games that Lloyd runs and some of the other people that I play with, but it's normally like I'm kind of like the point man, but everyone's got a say. But in Saga, it's literally like my word is law. Every decision comes down to me. Every important conversation falls upon me to execute. So it's a lot of pressure, and I feel a lot of pressure to like make good decisions throughout the game. And I'm constantly worried that my decisions are not correct, especially since they're so far removed from, like you say, other people. Like if you watch Lloyd play as leader in Isclopt or Nico, the way that they do it is so different from the way that I'm doing it that it's very interesting to kind of see how that pans out in the long term. And I'm not quite sure what the consequences of that will be. It's like Phelim is way nicer and way more of a negotiator than a lot of the other leaders who are very like, this is the law, I'm laying it down.
It's a tricky one, an interesting one, and a tricky one, because in a world where like most people are leaders the way that Nico or I would lead, which is like fear is effective and like kicking the shit out of the biggest guy you meet so that the rest of them know who's in charge. Like it's like prison, right? Like that's I think it's really interesting to see what the difference is, and I think like it will stand to fail down the end. Like, but I think for now it's really hard to build a reputation on being nice or on being like on like giving clemency or like mercy to people you defeat, because that's not traditionally the way that you like conquer somewhere, or traditionally the way that you like make a name for yourself. But I think the fact that he's doing that in itself is interesting enough that people will remember that. You know, it's very different and very interesting.
What strikes me as the really difficult thing, and you see, it's different because, like, with Faroth, who I kept mentioning in Saga last night, Faroth, like you were saying just then, Jeff, like Faroth is the point man in Against the Shadow and has opinions from his friends, and they generally come to a consensus. Then Faroth delivers it. But with Saga, that just isn't the case. You're quite right. You're the one that has to draw the line. And the trickiest thing is that our plight isn't exactly an easy one to begin with, because we need to get money, we need to gather forces, we need to rally against the enemies from the north. But at the same time, we don't want to piss off too many people, because then we're going to be surrounded by enemies, but we need to raid them because we need the money to beat the people that threaten us. So it's just a near impossible challenge to make the right call all the time. There isn't a right call.
Yeah.
It's just the lesser of two evils, which is the thing that I really enjoy about the campaign, because I think my character is very much the necessary evil of the game, who is very underhanded, and then you have polar opposite Phelim, who's trying to do the right thing, and it's just very interesting, and I imagine it's very difficult.
Yeah, I've really appreciated having people like Wagner in the game, because it's like there's a lot that happens that it's like I know as a player like that like being a bit more of a hard ass and a bit more of a mean guy is definitely like a more practical solution, but like that's just not really the way that Phelim's going to act. But Wagner has very rightly kind of taken up some of that responsibility of like Phelim gets to be the good guy leader who's like merciful and generous to his men, but some of that little nasty underwork that still has to happen is being freely done, not necessarily behind Phelim's back, because some of it he's been well aware of it, but he doesn't have to be the one that does it, which is I think different, because he's not necessarily a goody-goody. He's not like, oh, we should all just be peaceful and get along. It's just like, I want to make the least amount of enemies for the most amount of gain. But sometimes you have to be a little mean. So like having somebody who's willing to do that, that's not him, has been very, very valuable secretly, even if he won't say so openly.
So there's two other things I want to talk about with Saga. One of them is that you, following on from the niceness, is that you had this attempt to like go to villages and not harm anyone, to be like, listen, we don't have to do this violently. And then they would give you money. But then the word spread that you were this kind person. And then some of the villages were giving you less and less money. They were like, oh, he's not going to hurt us anyway, so why should we give him everything? And then there was a decision made that you were going to like make an example of a village. And I think that's easy to say, and I think it's hard to do. And I wanted you guys to do it so that you knew what it was like. And that you had to like actually go through with it. Like you had to make the decision to like stab those peasants and to like kill those dogs or whatever it is, you know, like you guys had to, it could have been an easy one to be like, okay, and there's a brutal attack and you blah, 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 blah. How did you guys feel about going through that fight?
It was tough because it's like you say, it's so easy for that just to become something that's like, because all the other ones were more or less hand wave. Like there was the first one that we talked through of like, okay, just give us the money and we'll leave. And then like we kind of just went along with that plan and didn't really go into too much detail. And then suddenly there's that resistance. And it was really tough, like in character, first of all, for Phelan to be like, no, we need to do this. Like if we don't do this, then people are just going to continue taking advantage of us, and they're going to continue just giving less and less until we're just basically sailing around for nothing. But he and I as a player and he as a character kind of lost sight of who his crew was, I think, forgetting that most of them are crazy pirate men, not like honorable warrior people.
Right.
So it
That's
very, very quickly got like way out of hand. It was just like, no, we're going to make an example. We're going to set some fires. We're going to take some people out. We're going to take the money, and then they'll know. And then suddenly, like, he's like, all right, men, go. And then suddenly it's just like mass chaos. People are just going nuts and murdering and raping and all that kind of stuff. It was like, whoa, how did this happen?
To me, that session that we've just done with Saga, it reminded me a little bit of the session, not the most recent one, but the one before of Vampire. With the sandbox games, every now and then you have almost like management sessions.
Yes.
Where essentially you get shit done, you organize yourself, you accrue wealth, or you at least start thinking about how to get wealth, you start thinking about your position in the world. And essentially we just swept that coastline of all the villages that we could find, started making a name for ourselves, which was a contradictory experience, it seemed, by the end of it. But regardless, a learning curve and a very interesting thing to role play as well. So that's what I really liked about it. I like that. I guess it's just the appeal of the sandbox, isn't it? Like, if we want, we can just spend our time sweeping across the coast and making people's lives hell. And that's exactly what we did. And it had a lot of benefits to it. And the other thing is that you have the interesting role-playing moments of seeing how different people react to different things. Sigrid, with her cryptic bits of advice to Phelan, and Vagnar's more just like, we need to just start getting shit done and start killing people who stand in our way and stuff. And
I think it's really awesome that we have both Sigrid and Vagnar, who to me are like the exact perfect duality of what it is to be a warrior in Iscloft. Like, you have to get shit done, and like Vagnar is like the primal survival, like, I will fucking bite your eyes out if I have to get on top, while Sigrid is more like, I am a civilized warrior, you know. And it's like, it's about honor and it's about oaths and it's about that kind of thing. And like, that's the duality of being a human in Iscloft. I think it's one of the big things for me, is like of the whole setting, is that like the grimness of being a survivor and the like moral imperative of being honorable. Like, and it's like this perfect little microcosm, which I love.
Yeah, like, it honestly, like, it feels like in those movies they always have those like dorky representations of like the guy, like the good dude dressed as an angel on one shoulder and the dude dressed as the devil on the other shoulder, and they're talking and arguing in your ear, telling you which way to go. Like, that's literally Phelan in this game. And there's like Sigrid on one hand of like, no, you need to be honorable, you need to respect the gods, and then Vagnar of just like, do whatever we need to do to get ahead, and that's all that matters. Like, it's literally like Iscloft embodied, yelling in my ears at all times, which is fantastic and also incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it's great.
And also, let's not forget, I'm sorry, Lloyd, just to say, let's not forget as well the other blessing of the sandbox. This is something I enjoy, which is having the GM basically having to like improvise random people that, you know, just stumble across the party. Like, there was that dude who showed up at the very beginning who you said was, you hadn't realized that there was going to be someone showing up, but they did.
Yep.
Yeah, he was great.
I guess I had Berserkers on the brain because I've been working on that subclass, or the class rather, because the idea initially for Berserkers in Iscloft that it was going to be a slight rework of the Barbarian class. But in the last week, I have decided I'm going to build it from the ground up and make a whole class for the Berserker, because it's not a Barbarian. And I mean, it has some of the same mechanics in that it doesn't wear clothes and that it fights really well. But it's different. It's like a holy thing. It's a whole different thing. So like I started working on that, and I think I've had those on the brain, and I've been thinking about what they might look like, what a berserker might look like, and I don't think it's like this slavering maniac. You know, like that's the barbarian. Oh, me smash, and I feel like the berserker is much more somebody who like is a normal person, is a very spiritual person, but when the fight starts, is a very different person. You know, so that guy was just like jovial, very spiritual, very religious. But it was, you know, close to that line, and it would have been a really nasty situation if that line had been crossed and there had been a fight, you know. Yeah, I love that, and that was just me being like, this is what it might look like, and it was useful for me in terms of world building, and I feel like that was a really fun encounter as well, with him.
Yeah, it was. Like I love how hard he just grilled the absolute hell out of Phelim on like, who are your friends here? They seem like interesting people that I hate. A person like you shouldn't hang around with people like him or her. Like just constantly like, no, I'm gonna like just that super devout, ultra like morality, like honor person. I'm just like, you're supposed to be a Carl. You're supposed to embody the same things that I'm embodying, and you're not. Kind of thing was very interesting.
While we're on the topic of Sandbox then, because I'm aware we're going to have to get to quite a lot of questions as well. But whilst we're on the topic of Sandbox, and as I think Against the Shadow with Good and Bad looming will follow nicely into our questions, let's talk about Vampire for a bit. Lloyd, what happened in the latest session of Vampire? Talk us through it.
Oh, God. Just a lot. So it's a real contrast, because for me and Jeff, we were off in a nightclub, and we were like having this like tense conversation with another vampire, and we were like, hey man, maybe you could like pay the primogen of our clan, you know, that like 5,000-year-old maniac who like lives in the sewers, you know, like that actual monster. And he was having none of it. And then we got in this fucking limo with this creepy blood sorcerer, and we were walking it. But while this is happening, Taylor's character, well, actually, Lionel's character is basically killed. It's attacked by this thing we now know as a fetch. This thing, this like puppet, gets thrown out of the window and gets knocked into torpor. Taylor's character is then like dragged onto the roof of the building and has this like horrifying conversation with it, where it wants to be her, wants to take her life. It thinks it is her. And we're just like having this chat with the guy in the limo about a business opportunity. And then we get a text from Taylor's character about like, Jesus, help me. Oh, God, help me. And so we went there. We called all of the power people we know, and none of them were willing to help us. So we went and tried to help. It was too late. There was an enormous attack helicopter on the top of the building. I got to some video footage of that. Screenshotted the shit out of a video that Taylor's character took. We found poor Toff in a dumpster. We brought him to Mr. Gisborne, who was exactly no help. And then we discovered that where they had potentially taken Tessa's character. So we went there, myself and Jeff's character, and began like a ninja assault mission to try and break into there and find her. It did not go according to plan. And we're in just really major trouble.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff. You go first.
No, I was just going to say that about sums it all up very well. Not optimistic about the next session and how it's going to go for us.
Well, my thoughts on the game, I first of all really thought you all did very well, considering like you being split up, like not the easiest thing to manage when suddenly two of your players are being attacked, or two of your team are being attacked. But the thing that I've been looking forward to quite a lot is the gradual reveal of the other forces that work within the world of darkness, and there is now the hint that there is something else with the fetch belonging to the changelings and the Fae that live beyond the hedge, which is something that is, or rather, a force of some kind that is being manipulated by those that you face. Seemingly that they are willing to use the essentially going back to necessary evils. They consider the fetch to be a necessary evil to lure you into a confrontation with them again. And I really liked. I just like how dangerous it is, to be honest. Like we were saying before in another one of these streams, I think with World of Darkness, the enemies that and the existing NPCs around you are always going to be incredibly powerful. So it's watching you having to deal with that by other means, if you know what I mean. And I find that very interesting.
I like it. I like it and I don't like it because I feel like a vampire for sure. And I like we're brand new, so we're obviously going to be. But sometimes I get frustrated because there's no one that I can beat in a fight except for people, humans. And I don't need to beat them in a fight ever, basically, because they're never a problem. Apart from these hunters, but I wouldn't consider them to be, strictly speaking, like humans, like civilians, you know what I mean? And I think it's really good that I have that, because traditionally my response in games like this is I make a mechanically powerful character and then I kick the shit out of people who won't agree with me or who like get in my way. Or like I intimidate them or I bully them or whatever it is. And I can't do that in this game. And it's like, it makes me have to like think in a different way, which makes me angry at times, but I really like it.
Yeah. What was interesting about this session for me is like, I think for most of the vampires so far, with a couple exceptions, like the top of the hospital scene, like a lot of it has been very human. Like it's been like us just doing things, trying to figure out what being a vampire means and trying to find other people who are vampires and talking with them. But this session really kind of showed how quickly it can go from just, chatting about weird vampire things to like, boom, like you're now in an explosive, dangerous war zone filled with terrible creatures who will kill you in a single hit. Like we haven't really seen a lot of the danger of the game. Like a lot of it's just been very like role play and exploration kind of focused, which has been super cool. But it was interesting to see it transition now into just like utter chaos where lives are at stake and there are like terrible, dangerous situations happening. Like it was a very quick and drastic change, but a cool one.
I think and this goes for not just my games, I won't take credit for it. I think it goes to the way that the game is actually built, because the powers that you all possess are incredibly strong. Donica can walk around basically unseen by anyone. Like Sigrid can, influence people's minds like significantly. Like that. If that was in D&D, then that's like insane. So when shit does hit the fan, then things do go pretty drastically like chaotic, which is fun. I maintain things might have gone a little bit differently had all four of you had been present when the fetch struck. A seemingly impossible foe to defeat, but definitely not the worst thing at all within the World of Darkness. And I think it might have gone differently if all of you had been there. But again, the blessing of a sandbox, that would never have happened if you'd all decided not to split up. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, and I think we kind of built up a sense of complacence is probably too strong a word, but kind of, we were so used to just being able to go separate ways because we're just like interacting with people. It's just like, oh, well, we'll talk to this guy, you talk to that guy, and we'll come back and we'll pool all of our information together. So it was nice to see that split up be punished with a terrible consequence rather than just kind of everyone just goes and does whatever they want to with or without each other. Kind of shows us that there's reasons to stick together just as well as there's reasons to split apart.
And also to put an emphasis on the fact that Taylor's character went to a place, she hasn't cut the ties entirely. And the people that are after you know that you're new, and they know that you're you might be weak to that. So it's something that they're going to try and use against you, I suppose, which is, yeah, it's interesting. It's all about the World of Darkness, though, like what it's like to lose your humanity and how can you hang on to it. and finally a humanity roll. Now we've finally worked out how to do them for Donica's character, for Donica.
Yes, I'm really pleased that happened because I was wondering when it would. Not that I was looking for it, but I know that's a part of the game and I hadn't really seen it happen yet. But I think you're right to start using it because I feel like the first few days of being a vampire are all learning, you know? Nights, I should say. It's all learning. And so, like, during that time, if you're, like, attacking people, it's to figure out if you can and what happens and whatever else. But now, like, Donica knew that he would kill that man. He, like, made the active decision to kill that guy so that he could, like, succeed on the mission. And even if he's doing it to save Tess, still murder, you know? And that was like an active decision that he made. He didn't even kill him by accident. He didn't like drink so deeply and like didn't notice. He was like, I'm deliberately going to do it. So I think it was absolutely the right thing. And I'm glad to see it appear.
Yeah, I think most kills before that point have been either out of desperation or accident, like Donica punching the, well, he didn't kill him, but Gavin in the head so hard, he didn't realize that was going to happen. He didn't think he was going to comatose the poor bastard. But yeah, now that you're sort of more aware of what you can do, it's more in your hands, and that's interesting to explore as well. So finally, against the shadow, let's talk about this briefly because it will lead us into our questions. So we, for a number of sessions now, have been accruing forces all across Middle-earth. We've spoken to the elves, we've gone to the dwarves, we have the Dunedain on side, and for is it 10 sessions, Lloyd? We've been basically building up to take Gundabad, which is what.
Yeah, I think not quite 10, but it's been maybe 7 or 8 sessions that you've been in this part of Middle-earth, you know?
Yeah, so and it goes back to what we were talking with Lawkeepers. It's getting to the stage where now we've accrued some a vast amount of forces, and now we're going to have to use them in some way. People won't know this because it's just in Against the Shadow group, but Caius posted this absolutely amazing bit of information. He'd found this book all about Gundabad from a different Middle-earth game.
It's MERP, Middle-earth role-playing.
Yeah.
I, after he posted that, went on a search and found a whole trove of those books, and Jesus Christ, the detail is unbelievable. There's maybe 30 books in that series, and they're all so detailed. Like, the one on Gundabad has, like, names for... Like, it has a structural breakdown of the whole place, and there's one for Dol Guldur, and there's one for Weathertop, and there's one for, you know, all of these places. There's also just, like, a general one about Rohan, and there's one about treasures in Middle-earth that has, like, 400 items that you can find in Middle-earth. It's just amazing. And this, like, absolutely invaluable tool for me, because so much of what we're doing is off book anyway. You know, it's all this, like, we're in the weeds kind of trying to figure out what exists in Middle-earth.
Also, the other thing that I noticed, which I really enjoyed reading in those books, and I urge anyone who's running Adventures in Middle-earth to check these out because, like, there's so much information. Like, for Gundabad, there is, like, a whole account of what happened when the Witch King was leading his forces against Arthendane, like, and what happened and how they retreated and how the cavalry, like, came over the mountains and stuff and what the leaders' names were and how many strong they were. Like, it's just so detailed, detailed, and it's really good if you're a Tolkien nut. But yeah, that's the challenge that awaits us. And I don't know how you're feeling about us having to go and try and take Gundabad now, Lloyd.
I'm really excited. I think it's going to be probably a multi-part session, the taking of Gundabad. It's an enormous mountain. That's a fortress. It used to be a dwarven castle. You know, which is just impenetrable anyway. And now you've got it teeming with millions of orcs, potentially, and other things. So I think it's going to be like a really nice sort of, not a climax to the campaign, but it's going to be like a climax to an arc, I think. Like, all of this work, you've done all this, you're going to take this place, hopefully, and like free it and wrest it from the hands of the enemy. And it's going to be difficult. I feel like I usually, with Against the Shadow, on Monday afternoon, I sit down and I like read a little bit of Tolkien stuff on the various wikis, and then I have a session plan. But with this one, I feel like there's going to be significantly more prep. Like, I need to think about exactly what's going to happen, or like what could happen, or like what the plan might be, because I want it to feel hectic. I want it to feel epic. I want like Middle-earthian moments, but I also want like Jarl moments of like fucking whee, like the ring in your ear, and you can see like death all around. Like I want that as well, you know. But I'm really excited to run this.
We stumbled across a discussion that I think might have divided us a little bit because in the very early stages of us discussing, which has been really good, discussing how we, with our accrued forces and with our characters, can take such a mighty stronghold as Gundabad. And Caius was like, well, we should block the water supply. And we should like drought them. We should like have them like dying of thirst in there. And then I think Dan was saying, well, you know, is it not more Lord of the Ringsy that when an army shows up at a stronghold, they instantly attack and besiege it and try and get in? There's no like long, lengthy sieges in Middle-earth. It's always battles, and that's it. And I mean, Jeff, you can tell us how you feel about this as well. Like, I mean, like, and I'll ask you both, like, what do you think is the better course of action, the more realistic approach, or the approach that fits more towards the film and the books? As the armies arrive, they strike, one of them wins. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's like on one hand, it's like you say, like I think especially to like in a setting like Middle-earth, it's so important to like make everything about it feel like Middle-earth. Like you don't get that feeling unless it's all there. So like there's part of me that does just want to say like, no, you're right. Like if this was, you know, something in the movies or in the books, it would just be like the army's arrived and let's charge. But like if the players do want to take a more practical approach, like I don't know that like at least if I were running the game, I don't know if I would like tell them to avoid that. I don't know. That's a tough one. Like I'm not really sure like where I fall on that just like off the get-go.
Yeah, for me it's 50-50. Like I think that I feel like in the movies they show you the part of the siege that is the exciting bit. I think that they have to. It's not interesting to show the 6 months of waiting outside of Helm's Deep, you know, or like the whatever amount of time they wait. I mean, they don't wait, but you know, like that's how. There's no point in having a siege and just immediately attacking. It's like not the point of a siege. That's just an attack, you know. So I feel like it makes a lot of sense to besiege a place, but I also feel like just not what happens in Middle-earth. Like they just get right to it. They don't mess around. They just, you know, kick the doors in.
I find it immensely not amusing, but very interesting because it's the Lord of the Rings part of your brain attacking the Jarl DM part of your brain. Big you know, like, we should starve them out. We should wait for 6 months until they can barely lift a blade before we attack. You know, but.
Like in Saga, like there's just no possible way that you could attack a place like that and have a hope, you know. But Middle-earth, you know, Baragon swam under a huge ship and like did something to the rudder and it fell apart. Like, you know, that would never happen in Saga. You would, if we were playing Saga, everyone would have drowned in that session, you know. Like, so there is a difference in my brain when we play that game than when we play Saga or we play an Iskloff game. You know, even in the way that we use like crit tables and stuff is different. So it's more heroic, and I know that Middle-earth is much more heroic than my usual style of game. So I think I'd be fine with a balance. Like there's a way that you can do both. Like rather than just like running up to the walls and like hitting them with your swords, like there's lots of things that you can do that doesn't involve a 10-year siege, but does involve tactical thinking. So like capturing bridges and water supplies and poisoning rations and you know, taking this keep and taking that plaza and, you know, all these different things that like the kind of way that an ancient siege might have gone, where you're taking bits of a city slowly but surely making your way through, and they would be retreating to the next point of safety and stuff like that. Like I think that's probably the way I'll do it. Probably, I say, because it is a full mountain full of orcs. Now, it's possible, like, you could run a campaign of this, of just the siege of Gundabad, you know, and the various orc factions in here, all the fucking crazy people who live in here. Like there are major enemies living in Gundabad. and enemies with a capital E, you know, like Nazgul and like a Balrog and like really scary shit lives in here. So you could have a whole campaign based around that. So it's kind of a mix for me trying to like figure out speed and like keeping the campaign in mind, but also giving this the time it needs to breathe because it's such a huge event.
I mean, a number of things that I think of this. It's really rewarding to me because we spent the time to accrue the forces to be able to take this thing. So I like that, and I like that we're going to take our time with it rather than rush it.
Mm-hmm.
I also love how terrifying the idea would be of attacking such a place. Like, can you imagine just like halfway through the battle, you somehow reach into the mountain, like you're in the dark. Yes. Surrounded by people that you don't know are your friends or your enemies. There are different parts of the mountain where you could be losing the battle, and there could be parts of the mountain where you're winning the battle, and you wouldn't be able to know. There is no way of communicating.
Exactly.
So it's just insane. It's just an insane idea. And then on top of that, as players, we know that there's a Balrog, but our characters don't. So that's even worse. Yep. So, yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be...
That's the terrifying thing.
Go ahead, Jeff, sorry.
I was just saying that's one of the terrifying things, like, as a player in Middle-earth, is you always know, like, your characters don't necessarily know what's all real, if they've even heard of these things at all. But as a player, you know they're there, but you kind of can't help but walk into them because, like, there's no way you can go justify acting in character of, like, oh, well, we should just in case prepare for a Balrog. Like, that's just not going to be a thing that any of the characters would even dream or think of.
No.
So you're just going to have this moment where you're like, yes, we're winning the battle. Like, this is going well. And then suddenly, and then it's just like, everyone's dead. Like, it's just chaos and murder.
Yeah, the small luxury, and sorry to cut you off, Lloyd, the small luxury is that we kind of know as players on top of this that if we did fight a Balrog, we wouldn't win.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. So it's kind of like, well, if we fight it, then that's it anyway. So there's kind of a freedom in that in a very morbid way. Sorry, Lloyd.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say that I think that this Gundabad, like, trilogy or whatever it's going to be, is going to be like a really unique GMing experience for me. It's going to be like a real test, I think, of my abilities, and I'm very excited about that. I've never really run like a proper battle with the intent of actually having it be a battle. So like I've done it where you're in a battle, but like we said earlier, it's about objectives and like you go and do this and blah, but this is going to be like an actual, oh Jesus, there's so much stuff going on, and there are 3 different spires of Gundabad, and how are you going to know what's happening over there? Like you say, you know, it's just going to be mental, and it's very exciting.
Is immensely exciting, and look, I mean, we've been talking about battles for quite some time. We're now going to put our mind to some questions. We've already been doing this for an hour, so I mean, this is just going to be a long one. So hopefully, people watching are enjoying this. But let's begin with the first question. Oh, very clever, thanks, Taylor. Question: how many times can Rob say "question" in 1 sentence? We'll find out, I'm sure.
We have the Facebook questions, which we should do first.
We should do the Facebook questions first. Yes, you're right. You're right.
Our first question is from Nicholas Jacquet, which is, "Do you ever sleep?" The answer to that is obviously not.
Nope.
Chex says, "Here's one I've never seen implemented in a game as of yet, at least not in full gory chaotic glory. The cavalry charge. The narrative is the easy part, but how does it fit? Combat or skill challenge before true initiative, etc." So how would you do a cavalry charge and give it like the proper, glory it's due?
It depends, doesn't it? Because it depends. If it's Lord of the Rings, then absolutely you pay all due course to the cavalry charge because it's a momentous thing when it happens. Yes. But at the same time, they're disastrous. It's instant death for people charging on into them and being hit by it. Like it's a nightmare. It would be a nightmare.
Yes.
My leanings would be towards, and I know I often go on about it, but my leanings would be towards the 3.5 rules of a cavalry of charging with mounts and stuff. Like you would get bonuses and stuff, and you could strike into initiative from a cavalry charge. So, and you get a bonus for it because although they know you're coming, you're still going to hit them with the momentum of a horse. So you would have an advantage. And it's a bit complicated, but like, I think, I don't know. I think that's how I'd go about it. I would give advantage to the people charging, I guess.
Okay, so for reference, I want to do a cavalry charge as Marius on my magic horse at some stage. It's just so get those rules out and get ready.
Oh, I will. I'll be ready. We'll do it.
For me, I would say I've done it once, and it was only in Middle Earth, and that's kind of the only place that I think it would happen. It could happen in Saga, but like Vikings historically didn't really fight on horse. Even those who had horses would like ride to a battle and then get off and fight on foot. But in Middle Earth, what I've done in the past, which is basically like ask what the positioning is, and if the positioning is good and the charge is clear, then I'm just like, okay, you roll me a dice and I'll just like narrate something. So with Dan, I think it was like he rolled a d20 and that many goblins just died straight away. And whatever it was, you know. So I think but like you say, in Lord of the Rings, the cavalry charge is like this sacred thing. It's much a bigger deal in Lord of the Rings than it is in other settings because, you know, the reverence that Tolkien has for horses and stuff like that. Because actually, what I think one of my favorite pieces of cinema ever is the Rohan charge of the Rohirrim. But I also love that it goes from like this like lovely music, and when they hit the orcs, there's just this sudden change to like screaming horses and like, you know, and I love that because that's what it is in my mind as well. It's like this glorious like brum, 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 and then you actually get there and it's just awful. Like horses are dying, men are dying, everyone's dying. It's just this brutal sort of. So I don't know. I think you'd have to kind of do it more narratively than combat-y, but that's in Middle Earth anyway.
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things is like pretty much really the only other like setting I think that you're gonna get like a real true cavalry charge, like you say, like other than in Middle Earth, is if you were playing like an actual like historic medieval warfare game, like actual Earth, like actual like 1600s like battle, where that kind of stuff was pretty common too. But like as far as actually executing it in the game, like I tend to agree that like doing it just as like straight up regular combat, like everyone roll initiative and go around and do their thing, like feels a little bit weird to me. Like it doesn't feel like it gives it the same kind of impact. If it's just like, okay, well, I'm riding in and I attack. Okay, now I'm riding in and I attack. Like it doesn't give you that impact, as Lloyd was saying, that like just utter smashing of waves of people and horses and everything just colliding. So I definitely would probably try to find another way to do it, but I'm not exactly sure how. Like it's something that I've thought about a lot, but I never came to a complete conclusion.
I honestly think, Lloyd, that your way of, I mean, for those of you watching this stream, go on to the Against the Shadow playlist or whatever, find the Silver King or the Silver Mountain or whatever the session was called.
King and Silver, yeah.
King and Silver, that's right. And check it out because, I mean, obviously it's not just you. Cynric was able to make his attack from the horse and get his bonuses. But then obviously everyone else had to be accounted for. All the other elven cavalry had to have their effect. So I think it was good.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it? Like, obviously they're going to kill a certain amount of them anyway. So is it like 10 plus whatever you roll on the die? That's how many you kill? Or like...
I think I made... I mean, thinking about
now, if you rolled one, and
yes,
you know, like
it's obviously a minimum, but I think it's like I think what it was like that I got Dan to roll an attack, and that's kind of how the group does, you know. But then Dan rolled a 20, like a natural 20, and I was like, okay, well, that's obviously great news. So the charge was like a really glorious splat, you know. So I think that's probably how I would do it. I would make the point of the wedge roll an attack, which is probably going to be a player character, and then that will determine how the charge goes overall, you know?
Yeah, I think that's probably the slickest way to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense for things like Middle Earth, where like the opponent's defenses are probably just going to be like orcs with shields. I just think it gets more complicated if you start bringing more like realistic, like how would you do a cavalry charge against like a pike block who's like set up formation to defend against? Like it can get very weird if you start getting like historically accurate with it.
So I think if a player is like, I'm going to charge that pike wall, then I'm like, then you deserve to die because you will. Like if you're willing to charge a speed wall, then you've made a huge mistake. But in Middle Earth, you know, that's what they do. Rohan charges a spear wall of orcs and smashes them. So who knows?
Who knows?
But you're right. It depends a lot on the setting, and also I think on like the quality of the cavalry, the quality of the people defending, and yeah, there's a lot to think about.
Yeah. I think there is an interesting aspect that gets ignored a lot of cavalry charges, which is like adding some morale element to it. Because like I don't care who you are. Like if you gave me a spear and told me like hold it out, and then a bunch of dudes with weapons are gonna charge you with a horse.
Yeah.
Like I don't care how effective a strategy a pike wall is against that, you're gonna be terrified. Like I think like maybe finding some way to bring that in, of like there's like a chance that they're just gonna rout like if the horses, if the cavalry is sufficiently badass enough.
That's a super
it's hard to like.
Yeah, especially the heavily armored cavalry as well. They're heavy cavalry smashing into
even
you,
the noise that it would make, like an armored horse and an armored rider, like just this like thunderous noise approaching you, and you're like, I'm gonna hold this spear and hope.
And multiply that by 300 or however many like horses there are, like it would just be deafening. And just like, yep, just hold this, poke it out that way, and they'll probably run into it, and maybe that'll stop them. It's like, oh god, no.
Okay, we've done that.
DBJ, our good friend, says, as a self-appointed third pillarist, how would you turn a major pitched battle into an environment? Could you make the chaos, the fog of war into a series of random challenges? Would you include minions-style rules in a gritty setting? Would you include exhaustion or despair? Lloyd, do you use minions in battles? I don't think I know. You do, yeah?
So I don't make them 1 hit point, I make them 10. Which is why you'll find you're very often rolling a d10, because I also use System Shock, because I feel like most of the time, it depends, right? In Middle Earth, I certainly will use minion rules. I think they're very, very clever. I think they're really a good way to give the impression of lots of enemies, but also make that encounter winnable by the players. And just because they have 1 hit point doesn't mean they're not doing that they're doing 1 damage, you know? So they're still putting out normal damage, but they are easy to kill. And that allows for like a nice cinematic sort of fight where you can swing your sword twice and kill 2 enemies, which is very Middle Earth to me. Like Aragorn's chopping orcs left, right, and center, you know? So I think minion rules are a good way to get a battle feeling across, because the players are always going to be heroes. Even in Isklov, where they're like, you know, ostensibly just people, they're still the player characters, and so they're more powerful than most of the people that they're going to meet, you know?
I think, well, the way I've done it with the 2 major battles that I've run that comes to mind in 2 different systems, and it worked just as well in both. Battle of Kilgannon for Law Keepers, I had health pools for the Silver Guard, so essentially whenever you were hitting people, like you were killing them and stuff. So it wasn't so much about that, it was just making sure that number was getting low enough for you to be able to rout them and stuff. And the same with the Stormtroopers attacking Signal Station. They had a health pool, and once, you know, they'd been devastated by the Force powers, by the ex-Stormtrooper and stuff, then they would flee as well. So I think that's another good way of doing it, to make it into that narrative kind of flow. But in terms of environment and other random stuff, I think, to be honest, with our discussion about Gundabad before, like I think that's generally the way we all lean, is that there should be lots of different things happening in the fights, in the battles. I mean, it is definitely environment. It is the environment of war.
I feel like there's lots that you could do in terms of like slipping on entrails and dead people. Like I feel like that's a real concern. Like I always think of the shield wall, and when I think of, there's a particular passage from Bernard Cornwell's Saxon Chronicles, the first time that Uhtred goes into a shield wall, and the description is like so amazingly detailed and gritty that it's burned into my brain, of like the smell of piss and shit of like people who are terrified, the strain of like the burn of your muscles as you're like holding that wall in place, and then like people like trying to stab over the shield, and people crawling under in the muck to like try and shank you in the thigh. Like all this sort of stuff is going on beyond the immediate like you holding the shield and trying to stab a person in front of you. So there's lots that you can do with that, I think, in trying to get the environment across. Certainly it's difficult terrain. I don't think there's any possible way you can say it's not. Beyond that, I think
Well, I think you said it like with that description, Lloyd. You were saying, oh well, the entrails and piss is everywhere. Like that's a Constitution saving throw if I ever heard of one. The morale that Jeff was saying earlier, definitely a wisdom save. Like easily, all of these effects are going to be affecting your characters and your men around you and stuff. Yeah.
Yep. You got to think of like dust being kicked up and smoke from fires. And you got to just think of like the random chance of someone killing you. Like that's a big part of ancient battles where, you know, you might be fighting a dude right in front of you and then some dude next to you or next to him is just going to shank you with a spear, you know? Like that's a real, probably how more people died. It's really the retreat is where most people died. But like, I feel like that's a real thing that happens, you know? So I think there's loads you can do. And I would love to see DBJ, a battle cinematic environs work on that.
I would love to see someone do a one-shot maybe beginning with your player characters in a routing army. Like you say, Lloyd, that's the most dangerous point. As soon as you start running, everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to get chased down. I'd love to see.
That's when the majority of deaths happened in those wars. Like it was just kind of like clash, clash, clash. Oh God, we're going to lose. They start running, and then it's just a chase down and a slaughter.
Yeah.
But like, I think like morale and like routing is something like severely underused in RPG like warfare battles, where it's like so many people just do like everyone just fights until eventually one side everyone's dead and the other side there are people left alive and they win. It's like that's not really ever how it happened. Like there'd be a little bit of a fight, one team would scare the others off, and then they would just chase down and kill.
Okay, we have a question from Jeff Doty. What preparation and research do you do when going into an established setting that you're unfamiliar with? Do you have a process to become familiar enough in the world to be comfortable playing in it? How important as a player is it to know a setting intricately going into a game?
I'll tackle this first if you don't mind, because it's something that I rarely have to deal with. When I run games, usually I'm intimately familiar with the settings. I know Lord of the Rings very well. I know Star Wars very well, and I know my own setting very well. Lately, as I said at the top of the stream, I'm going to be running an Isklof one-shot soon, and that is something that I know I'm going to have to prepare for. I'm going to have to like dig deep. So the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to watch back lots of YALDM games and other games that other people have run, and I have thankfully access to a lot of Isklof stuff because I'm friends with Lloyd, so I can look into that. For me, it's important to get those things right. It's important for me to make sure that I'm in a position where if I'm asked a question, I'll be able to answer it with the right thematic detail, because otherwise you're not in Isklof. It's the personality that you need to get correct and the terminology, and there's a lot of it. And there's a lot of Norse gods that I need to get more familiar with. You know, I know the basic ones. I know Tyr, I know Odin, I know Thor, but, you know, and the sea bitch. But that's about it. Oh, and Loki. So yeah, just steeping myself in it, I think, is the way I do it. It's like what I've been doing with the Doctor Who stuff that I'm preparing for. I've just been watching all of Doctor Who. I just get it into my brain, and so I can then just do it, I guess. Like there's not really a disciplined way that I do it. It's just steep myself in it.
Yeah, for me, I think like I ran Numenera having read maybe 20% of the book, but I got the impression of what the setting was, which is like it's the future, science is magic, and there's weird shit all over the place. And like that was enough for me to like run Numenera. I don't know how faithful my Numenera games were to the setting, but there's a place called Beyond the Beyond, which is like so far from civilization that no one knows what's there, and that's where all of my games took place. It was just like, here's a weird thing, here's a moral question. What is it to be a human? That was every Numenera game I ran. You know, just like weird philosophical questions and stuff. I love that. I know I don't worry too much about running a setting and knowing it intimately. But I don't tend to run a lot of settings that I don't know well. Like I have done it, but I don't tend to. I think the natural thing is if you like something a lot, you'll learn a lot about it. And that's the stuff that I want to run. So like I love Middle-earth, want to run that. Love Warhammer, want to run that. You know, like all these different things that I'm interested in anyway, naturally are going to be the things that I run. I think like Harbinger is a good example, which is like a setting that doesn't have a lot of information, or like there is some, but like there's not a huge amount. And I was running that from like 0.1 or whatever, where there was almost no information and I was just making shit up. And I think that's maybe part of it. It's just like the willingness to like someone has put work into this and has made it, and this goes for Iskov too. But like, just like make it up, you know, like it doesn't matter. I won't be upset. Matt won't be upset. You know, like I think that's the takeaway is just like make it yours.
But at the same time, I think you can argue, like with Numenera, I look on that as almost like a Forgotten Realm setting. Like there's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of background to it. But at the same time, it is just a means to an end to get you running some Numenera games. But I think because, I don't know, maybe I don't think it's because I know you, but but Iskloft has like a... It wouldn't be Iskloft if it didn't have those things that I just spoke about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So, but yeah, no, I'm with you, man. Sorry, Jeff, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I think just kind of a thing just to kind of press on that a little bit, just because I think it's interesting, is I feel like there's a lot of settings that you can just make it up, but I feel like there are also a lot of settings where if you did that, like, would you, like, if you were playing in a game of Middle-earth and the GM just started making stuff up, like, that to me feels way different. Like,
yes.
I feel like you would react very poorly to that, like, against your own.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to, but I know that I would. I'd be like, what? Because you're right, and that's what you're saying, Rob. That there's a feel to a setting. Like Middle Earth feels a certain way, and if you're not following that, then I'll be like, huh, what? Is this even Middle Earth anymore? Yeah. So I guess actually a good exercise then, if you want to run a setting you don't know it well, is to do that 5 pillars thing, that me and you have talked about a few times, Rob, which is like think of 5 things about the setting that make it the setting, and like try and keep to those.
For sure. Let me bring up the next question quickly, unless you've got it in front of you.
Yeah, Nicholas asks, I'd add to this, how much do you research real societies and how they function when portraying them in a game? For instance, how deep did you study Nordic mythology for your own setting? I didn't, it's tricky because I didn't really study it actively. I've just always been really interested in it since I was a little kid. So I kind of just like absorbed it passively. I've always been reading like historical fiction, like Viking sort of historical fiction and like Celtic historical fiction. I've always watched Viking movies and things like that. So it's kind of like a lifetime, I guess, of me being into it. And the same goes for Rome, you know, when I run things in Rome or I play in Rome and for Middle-earth and all these things that I just have been interested in a long time. If I was starting a whole new thing, then I guess I would study. But I don't know. That would feel too much like work to me, you know?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is like, I think the question kind of like assumes kind of the opposite of how most people do things. Like, for example, my setting has like a lot of influence of like weird like alchemy and like spiritual shit and like occult rituals and that kind of like nonsense. But like that's because that's stuff that I already liked. Yeah. So it's like I wanted to make an RPG setting about those things because I like them. Like I think it's very rare that somebody says like, I'm going to make a setting about this culture that I know nothing about, so let me start looking into it. Like it's I think almost always the other way around. Like there's something that you're interested in about that culture, which makes you want to make a setting about it, which means you already kind of have a baseline knowledge about it. Like I can't ever think of a time where I've like decided I want to run a game in this setting that I know nothing about, and I'm going to learn about it now so I can run it. Like that strikes me as something that rarely happens.
So I can think of like maybe 1 or 2. I would say Symbaroum is a setting that I think has a lot of potential to be very interesting, but I know nothing about it. I also think that City of Mist is a game that I'm really interested in, sort of like it's adjacent to my interests, but I don't know anything about it or the setting or how it works or what you are. I just like the art and I've read a little bit about it and I'm like, that seems gorgeous. I've no idea about it. So I'd say, but those are established RPGs or whatever, and they have a setting in the role-playing game itself, you know? I think like it would be strange for me to be like, I'm going to run a game set in the Pacific Islands, considering I have no knowledge about that, or like very little, right? That's kind of a different thing, I guess, yeah.
I think for me, it's not really research at all. So say for Nine Kingdoms, there are influences from a lot of places. Like the witch hunters are your medieval witch hunters, but they actually have the power of gods at their fingertips. The Dragonborn have been influenced from, or what's left of them influenced from Tibetan culture and things like that. There's terms like seneschal, that's like from Persian sort of stuff that I've sort of looked into a little bit, and all sorts. I wouldn't call it research. I'd say there's just elements of history, particularly historical medieval and battle history, like war history, that kind of stuff, that I'm like, oh, that's cool, I have that. That's, and I take little bits and sort of try and blend it into the already existing mix. I think if I were to start another setting, like say for instance Lloyd has with Iskov, where there is the definitive influence of Viking culture, I would have to start from the ground up. And I don't know, it would have to be an era that I was really kind of invested in, and most games that have that have already achieved that, so I wouldn't really, I don't know what it is. I guess I don't run those kind of games.
Yeah. Well, I think an underused tool too for these types of settings is that, like, I think a lot of people assume that, like, people don't see all the different passes and edits to all the settings that go into, like, adding in the little details that things like Iskloft has. Like, to just, like, write Iskloft off the bat, like that's not going to happen. Like, these are things that, like, have been changing and moving and, like, adding more detail, and then a couple months go by and you add more detail, and then a couple months go by and you add another layer, and it's like, these are things that are more developed than, like, researched and written, if that makes sense.
And I'd like to say very quickly that I think you've absolutely nailed it there, Jeff, because there's a huge difference between, how do I even put this? It basically, if you want to start writing a setting, don't play the setting, because it's going to change because of the games you play. Like, and you quite rightly said, like, Iskloft was completely different to begin with. There was all sorts of different stuff happening in Iskloft, wasn't it, Lloyd?
Yes.
And that slowly narrowed, and it slowly shaped itself into kind of the finished product that is today. I know there are obviously some mechanical changes that still happen, but the heart of it is there, and it beats strongly. And I think it's only because of years of play that it's become it has that very strong identity now. And I suspect that would happen with lots and lots of different worlds that you plan to create, and it's just a matter of time in play, rather than you just sitting there at your keyboard like, this is what happened in this state, and then this battle happened, blah blah blah. Like,
yeah, I don't think you can create something like a RPG setting in a vacuum anyway. There's too much that has to go into it. And I feel like every time someone runs a game in it, like, that's so much better than what you're going to come up sitting there for 4 hours on your own, you know? Yeah, it's just, run that shit over and over again. Run into the ground.
To the point where I'm just like there are bits I'd leave wide open, because, like, thankfully I thought about that particular argument. So I know we talked about it before, but like with the drow and stuff, I spoke with Locris because I knew we were going to go there. You know, we were going to go to the Underdark, like, as an example, like, so it would be useful and stuff that was going to be used. And because of that, it now has an identity in the world, like, much stronger, as if rather than me just saying, the Underdark is there and this happens in it and blah blah blah. Yeah, so
and, like, it's okay to get, like, cultural details wrong at first. Like, if you want to make a whatever culture setting, like, just whatever you know, just put that in it and play it. And then once you learn something new, like, people, like, think, like, settings are like books, where once you've written it, it's there and you can't change it. But you absolutely can change it. Like, these are things that can update and move over time as you get more information. You say, the setting used to be like this. I'm just completely changing that. I'm taking this out, putting this new information in instead, because it's better and more accurately reflects what I want. Like, just do it and keep doing it. And over time, it'll get, as Rob said, narrower and narrower towards the specific identity that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It's like sculpture. You cut away until you find the thing within.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Beautiful, man. Talking about cutting away, we're going to talk about some weapons now.
Yes. These segues, Rob. Fucking killing it.
I know, man.
Killing it.
Tyler Hurst. How would you handle army-specific weapons in battles outcome? When I say this, I mean the Viking shield wall, the Roman trebuchet, Carthaginian war elephants. Do you let these weapons impact battles more heavily than other elements? To be honest, you go.
It just happened in Against the Shadow with Black Powder, and how insane the difference is. I think that's a really interesting thing, and for me, that's why I find ancient military history more interesting than modern military history, is because there's such asymmetry in the forces. So, like at the time of the Roman Empire, the armies are so different to each other. Like Rome has this like amazing legionary maniple sort of formation that they've perfected over hundreds of years. Carthage has these amazing mercenary armies, and then their own sort of core of, and like everywhere you go in the Mediterranean, like just this tiny part of the world, the armies are different. 10 miles up the road, that's a totally different army. I think, I don't know how I would do it mechanically, but I think thematically it's really good to focus on the differences between forces. It's something that I find in Iskloft doesn't happen, and I wish there was more of it, but it can't be because it's a monocultural setting. So forces tend to be very similar. So it's kind of like when you go back and play Empire Total War, and everyone has regiments of foot soldiers who have muskets, and you have some cannons. Like, it's samey. But I think you should focus on the differences, and I think that it's magnified in fantasy settings where, like, the difference between an elven army and an orcish army and a dwarven army and a fucking Jesus, I don't know, like a goblin army is so different, and you've got monsters involved, and you've got all sorts of shit,
Well, it's just cooler. I mean, when did you play a strategy game that you got really excited about when you looked at all the different unit types from the different armies and they're all the same? You know what I mean? Just on that basic level, like, that would be pretty dull. Unless it has the grounding and logic behind it and the theme that keeps that together with things like Iskloft. I think that's the vital detail. And also, if you've got Carthaginian war elephants in a battle, then that's so cool, like, and terrifying. That's a moment when you're charged by elephants in a fight. Definitely throw that in. Like, I would love to be in a game where you had to deal with that kind of thing.
Oh God, you'd just be so afraid.
We're talking about cavalry, elephant cavalry.
Imagine you'd never seen an elephant before, which is the case for lots of people, in the ancient world. What the fuck is that monster? What is it? Imagine.
Yeah. Talking about the effects of like morale in your battles, like just imagine like you've never encountered something like that before, and suddenly it's just like that is literally a monster. Like they have monsters that they are riding into battle at us.
Yep, it
like,
would be the
even aside from
just ever seen.
Yeah. Like even aside from like the coolness aspect of it, which I'm totally all for, like even if you just look at like military history, as you were saying, like battles were so much more often determined by like technology and like a little bit of tactics than they were like any amount of individual skill. Like if one army has, like steel and black powder and guns, and the other side has like wooden spears and like cloth, like it doesn't matter how good you are, like you're gonna get destroyed.
Yeah.
Like the effects of technology disparities are like massive in warfare, and again I think something that's kind of underplayed in a lot of fantasy warfare.
There's a thing that Duncan says when he talks about World War One, where he's talking about like the fleets, particularly how like for hundreds of years the fleets would have been like in the 1800s you could have had a fleet from like 1600 and it would have had a decent chance, but then you go to like the difference between 1901 and 1915, and the 1915 fleet just fucking destroys every fleet that's come before it. And that's like the thing that's interesting about the technology thing, is that like you could say potentially that Alexander's army would defeat an army from 1,000 years after he was around, but if you go forward another 1,000 years, there's no fucking possible way that he would have a chance. I think that's interesting. That's kind of what I want to look at a little bit with Jade Horde, that the huge difference in technology and how that affects battles. We'll see down the road somewhere.
That's excellent. Let's see with our next question. Chex says, here is a follow-up to mine own and a few above. Many of the circumstances or changes in, as the case may be, involve mechanics in one way or another. how succinctly and easily get any changes across to the players in the moment or moments before, so as to not take away from the thrill of the moment. Obviously, some mechanics are more involved than others, but how do or would you drop that info? So a new mechanic involved in dealing with mass forces, I'm guessing, is what he's implying.
Right, so if you're dropping a new mechanic into a game and it's happening during the game, how do you kind of do that, I guess?
So I do this thing, and we talk about it. It comes up every now and then, but I do this thing where I shout in a panicked manner at the players, and it forces them to think, oh my god, this thing's happening, and I'm saying, you have to do this now. Like, you have to roll this die and tell me what you get. Like, or I think if you deliver that information but in the mood that you want them to understand it in, then they will catch on pretty quickly. I don't know if that makes any sense or
yes. Not. I think that's good at bringing across tone.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's really, really effective, and it's something that I've stolen from you big time, because now when I'm in a battle, I'm like, what are you doing?
It works.
It works really well, yeah.
But obviously that will be difficult because you need to be clear when explaining mechanics. I mean, I would say maybe speak to people before and say, look, we're going to try and use this, because if you've only got a small amount of time to it, like, it's hard. Like, do you really drop mechanics on people like mid-session? Like, without
I think the way that I would do it, if, again, I agree that the best option is probably to say, like, before the session, here's a set of rules that I'd like to try out, to just be ready just in case. But I think it's one of the easier solutions is just to, like, ignore all the finer details. Just tell the players what they need to do, like, just as if they were going to do any other normal roll. So rather than saying, like, okay, well, here's a new set of mechanics, I'm going to need you to roll this because it's going to affect this, and now we're going to track this. So just say, make this roll, and then just say what happens. Like, leave the fine details and conversation about it for the break or after the session or before the session or whatever. And just say, here's what I need from you, here's what happens. And, like, just kind of, I guess, gloss over, like, the fine parts of it. I guess that can break down for more complicated mechanics, but that's probably not something you should introduce
mid-session,
out of nowhere in the middle of the game anyways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We should really start pushing through some more of these questions. So let's go to the next one. Taylor says, what are some of the most interesting consequences your players have run across? How did it affect the game and their future decisions? I talk very briefly about a game that I've run before. It's not one I've run online. It was a little while ago. There was I've spoken about the actual fight before, but not the fallout of it. So we're talking about PvP. There was a moment where one of my player characters, who was playing a monk, had a crisis of faith and turned to an individual that basically turned out to be the antagonist, the surprise antagonist, who was trying to basically ascend to godhood. And the way that he was going to do that was by making this floating city crash into the abyss by removing this powerful runic stone that kept it floating in the air. And it was up to the other player character, because it was only 2-player campaign, to stop him. So the final fight of the campaign was a PvP on the top of this city, trying to stop it from falling into the abyss. And unfortunately, the good guy ranger failed in his endeavor, got murdered, and then the city fell into the abyss, and everyone died. But that city was a major city within the setting of Main Realm, which was my old D&D setting. And it was interesting because it was the heart of the entire setting. It was known as the Empirical. It was where the empire of the setting basically resided in. And from that point, the empire began collapsing because that was their main stronghold, and that was where all of their wealth was. Like, there were so many problems because this city had just been destroyed. So you saw a breakdown of law and order across the land, and nowhere for their forces to fall back from the imposing forces of other different nations trying to invade and that kind of stuff. And it also made missions. It meant that there was a party that went down to find the remains of the city at the bottom of the abyss. So there was this wrecked city in this abyss that adventures could take place in as well. So that was like a world-changing consequence just because of a fight between two characters. I'd say that's probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most.
I don't have anything like that. That's a really good example. I like the idea a lot of like branching consequences when things happen. I think I will have examples in a couple of weeks in a few more games of Saga of major consequences coming through after all of the raiding that you've done. So I think, that will be, but I've seen it as a player. I've seen it majorly in lots of Nico games. When I was Gunnarsson, famous king of Iskloft, I broke a piece. I killed a man under a peace branch, and I was a paladin, and then I wasn't. Then I was a fighter for like 10 sessions. I became this fallen thing, and I loved that. It was fucking great, and it really makes me like value oaths and stuff now when I play in Iskloft, and when I have players playing Iskloft, because that's the kind of like impact it has, and that's why people give you so much shit about it, Rob, about the fact that you broke an oath, because it's a huge deal, So that was a really, really big one, and we had Havisla had a night with one of the people in the village in order to like get your freedom, and now she's pregnant. I cannot think of a worse place to be pregnant than on a Reaving crew in Iskloft. Like I struggle to think of a worse place.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. I mean, yeah, like you say, a lot of the examples of dire consequences and changes in decision making that like come to mind, I think are like in progress for me right now of like Saga and Vampire, and like seeing how all these like we're kind of in the midst of the decision making, and I think we're about to hit the consequence point of that. So that'll be interesting to kind of see the back end of it, but.
Yeah, I think an important thing to consider as well is that a lot of these consequences that we're talking about aren't necessarily like the example I gave was a world-shaking consequence, right? But I think that's no more important from the things that are very personal, like a personal consequence, like you were saying with Vagnar now being confronted with these dreams of the Raven and the like, and yeah, I think they accumulate and they just become part of the story. And it just makes it infinitely more interesting than if you're just walking around and doing stuff and then you never hear anything back from those events ever again. And sometimes time has to pass. This is the other thing. A lot of games don't last long enough for you to witness the consequence,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially in like one-shot culture of like a lot of the games that happen in AbTab. Like a lot of that we kind of skip the consequences. Like you do the actions and then the session ends. And like the rest of it's kind of left to its own devices. So it's kind of more of like you can do consequences well in a one shot. It's possible, but I think it's rare. Whereas like a campaign is really the time to hit players hard with well, you did this 5 sessions ago, and you can't forget about that. I think we're going to see a lot of that happening soon in some of the games that we're in.
You were talking, Rob, about the gratification, and like that's one of the main things about role-playing games that I find so satisfying is like when I take an action and then down the line I see the ripples of that action,
yeah. And they could be good. They're good consequences as well.
Yes, like course, yeah.
Battle of Kilgannon, you help those people out on the Riverbreak Keep, and then you got reinforcements in a battle like 7 sessions later or whatever. Like, just some things are good. Some things can be nice.
Yeah.
Last Facebook question.
So Anthony Knight says, extreme weather conditions during battle scenes. Do you like adding these in? Perhaps making a usually simple enemy to defeat now not such an easy task? Aside from making things like perception, movement checks, etc., more difficult due to the conditions, would you also add in a moral deficit to any rolls? A morale deficit, attacks perhaps, when players make several failed rolls, like that. Just to add to the tension of the battle. Then to counteract that, would you throw in a glimmer of hope to boost morale checks, attacks, etc., noticing the enemy is also struggling, seeing the captive maiden they're trying to rescue. Basically, weather conditions in battle affecting your players in more unique ways other than a simple increased difficulty.
I think you've got to toe a very careful line there with the morale stuff. And I know we've covered morale a fair bit in this stream, actually, which is actually quite nice. but I think you've got to tread the careful line because there will, and I'm not saying that I know anyone who will do this. This isn't directed at anyone, but I can imagine it happening where a DM turns around to you and says, "No, you're frightened now because you failed too many morale checks or whatever, or you're going to do this, or you're going to feel this way because of this happening." Like,
sure, yep.
Some people won't take kindly to that, and I think that's unsportsmanlike of them. But I can tell it would happen in some games.
Yep.
I mean, I can kind of understand it. To be fair, like there's the ways that humans react to like continued frustration is very different across a lot of different people. So like I can see how it might be a little unfair as a GM to say, no, your character that you've been playing and that you know is gonna feel like this. Like when I talk about morale stuff, I think I at least usually mean it more in the context of the people other than the player characters. Like the player characters are free to make their own morale decisions, but everybody else in the battle, it's going to be less up to them to be able to decide that.
I mean, it implies a superhuman level of bravery of a player character because it's a tricky one. You're right, because you shouldn't tell your player characters how to feel. I've been reading Mythorog recently with the intent of running that sometime soon, and that has a morale system that can be pretty shocking. Like if you are a normal dude and then you're in this fight and your friends start dying and then you see a monster, like, yeah, you're going to run. Of course you're going to run. And I think I like that. But it conflicts with the idea of the heroic PC big time. I always think one of the things I love about playing Marius, a paladin, is that he won't be afraid. And that's like a unique thing about him is he won't be afraid. And I love that. And I think that's a really paladin-y thing, that he'll face any danger. But then if everyone can do it, then why even have that feature, So I think it would be nice to see different, like for me in Isklof, like imagine a berserker will never be afraid, or like maybe is incapable of being afraid, which is a different thing to overcoming a fear because of the rage or whatever. I like that asymmetry, that some people can lose their cool and want to flee because they're going to die,
I think if it's I mean, the very simple and very easy way to deal with the morale thing, and I know I said it, and I probably it's too broad to say, oh, people don't want to be told how they're feeling, because I mean, you can just turn around and say, well, it's a fear effect. It's in the rules. This thing exists. Morale is a fear effect. End of discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. And some people are immune to that. Like if your character's like Marius and has things against fear effects and whatever, and yeah, it's good.
Okay. Yeah, there's also just just super quick. There's also just the major point when it comes to morale stuff like that is like with the people that at least that we tend to play with, you don't really need to do that because they're gonna let their characters be afraid. Like I think like it's also just a matter of, as a player, try to actually think like I'd be terrified of this situation and like letting that actually be real. Like I think so many people try to be like the stoic badass all the time. And it's like, just let your character be scared sometimes. Like it's gonna happen. And like if you do that, then the GM doesn't have to like ham-fistedly tell you that you're afraid because you're willing to actually play it out.
It's a good point.
We have 5 or 6 questions in the YouTube chat. Do you just want to gun through them quickly?
Yes. Will we go from the top or from the bottom?
Yep. From the top.
Okay.
Let's see. RDWB says, question: I often find running large-scale battles, mass combat, can become slow and repetitive. What are some ways to keep things moving and exciting? I think, to be honest, we talked quite a lot about that this thing, but yeah, mix it up, keep changing things, keep surprising them, keep the mood intense, and they won't get bored.
And do things that aren't just straight up combat. Skill challenges, environmental things, other stuff.
Logo Sarsgaard says, question: running games in different systems can be a learning experience. What have you learned playing and running the World of Darkness vampire system? I can tell you something that I've learned. For me, running games, I've learned that the system doesn't really matter. For me, I'm not saying it's going to be for everyone, but I find that I can run the game as long as I have a rough understanding of what the basics are. I can run the games that I want the way I want them to be run. World of Darkness has a number of nuanced rules and things. Still, a lot of the things, as my players can tell you, I don't understand. But I'm upfront with that, and I'm like, look, we're just going to determine it by doing it this way, and we're learning. You know, we've developed the way that we are rolling criticals and critical fails now. We've been implementing that. The morality, humanity checks are coming in. So I've learned that you just can just start running a system, and you will get better at it as you go, I suppose. Now branching out to use Cubicle 7's Doctor Who. Never run that before, but I'm going to do it. Who knows? Maybe one day I may even conquer Fantasy Fight Star Wars. Who knows? What do you think about playing it very quickly?
I really like the character creation, and I really like the base. What do you call it? Like the system you use to resolve things. Yeah, I just think that's really clever. You take two things, and you have basically this whole gamut of skills. So you take a physical thing, or like you take one of your attributes, one of your skills, that's how you roll. I think that's great. And I like the character creation system a lot. I love the merit thing that they have involved. I think that's fucking great. It really makes it a unique character.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's not really a whole lot about the system-specific stuff. Like, I mean, I like the system. I enjoy the system. There's a lot that I enjoy about it. But honestly, a lot of my learning experience with that game has been from other things. Like, I've realized how awesome playing in a modern game is, like, just a modern setting, things that are happening now. Like, it's such a different experience. Between that and, like, a fantasy game is much vaster than I thought it would be. And I really like... I love fantasy, but like I also really like the modern feel that like totally changes everything about how the game feels, and I love that.
Yeah, 100% agreed. RDWB says, question: running mass combat can be difficult to convey. How in Theatre of the Mind can you get across to your players what is happening in the battle? How to convey positioning of movements? I have two answers for that, but I think someone else should go first.
I would just say you don't have to. They only see what's around them. Sorry.
Yeah.
That would be my answer.
No. Yeah, and there's something that I like to do. If we're specifically in initiative combat, of like when you pass it to someone's turn, just do like a super quick recap of what's just happened. Of like, okay, you've just seen this guy charge over to your friend. You hit him with a sword. You see your friend take some damage. What do you do? So kind of just like keeping a constant reiteration of the things that have recently happened, I think helps solidify it a lot more in people's minds when they're starting their turn with a frame of reference, rather than just like, you're here and there's people, what do you do?
Yeah, and starting their turn saying, while you have been pushing with your men forwards, you, for a moment, spot that on the left flank, new enemies are pouring from the keep and are threatening your position. What do you do? Things like that, yeah. The other answer I would say is don't convey them at all and buy into the confusing horror of a battle, and you don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Fair point. In that direction as well. So either way.
So there's a big chunk, and then our next question I think is from Lionel. What do you think about PCs making con saves as battle drags on and the PCs get tired? How would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think exhaustion is definitely an interesting thing. Like, it doesn't come up very much in like skirmish combat for things like 5e, but I think if you're doing like a large scale war where people are constantly doing things, like implementing some sort of exhaustion, like every day they need to make a save to not gain another level and so on, is definitely something that I have seen done, and I think adds a very interesting element to it. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, in realistic, gritty, medieval Viking warfare, there'd be battles that go on for entire days, you know, and you'd be absolutely knackered. Like, look at the War of the Roses; they'd fight for days upon days before any ground was ever like really acquired from either side. So, I think Lloyd has Lloyd, you love exhaustion rules. They're like your favorite rule in the world. So, I think Jeff, you're quite spot on there. Yeah, and I think. Yeah, it comes with the territory, I guess, that exhaustion would occur on such a horrific number of days.
It's one of the things that you have to take in mind, like how realistic do you want to make it? Because I feel like you could probably, like, if you're fighting for 1 full minute in armor with a large weapon, you could probably do that if you were trained to do that. I think beyond a full minute, if you're swinging the sword twice every round, every 6 seconds, just swinging the sword twice. I feel like there's no human that could really keep that up for more than 1 minute, even at peak physical, you know. But then, how granular do you want to get, and how realistic do you want to get with it? You know, if you want to say you gain a level of exhaustion every 10 rounds, you could do that. But I might say that when the encounter ends, you could, make a save or gain exhaustion, something like that.
I think, and to look again into the historical sort of elements of it, and I'll use the War of the Roses again, because this, like, your military training would consist, rather than quick bursts of energy, be long, drawn out tactical maneuvers, economy of movement in your armor, not exhausting yourself quickly, letting your enemy get tired. And then you would swap places with people in the ranks behind you. You would then fall back, someone else would take your place, you go to the back of the line, have a drink of water, hope you don't get hit with a cannon, and then go back and repeat. That's how they fought. No, it's true. That's how they fought. So, I mean, there's that to consider. Like, there's almost like a brutal, horrible mundanity to the way that war was fought in that way, like an attritional fight. And I think that would be really interesting to explore.
The Roman legionaries did that too, where you would fight in the front for a certain time. Centurion would blow a whistle, you make your way to the back, and then you can go and like breathe until you get to the front again. That's worth considering too. It's never going to happen it would be really lame in a role-playing game to be like, okay, and stop, and you're going to the back. You spend six turns standing there and breathing,
No, I quite like that though. I want to do it. You have like a little because if they talk to each other, they'd be like, how do you think it's going? Like, the back of the line.
To be fair too, it would be a good way to keep to prevent the mundanity of mechanical combat too, as well, where you go for a few rounds, you take a step back, you have a little bit of role-playing time, chatting with the other soldiers about how terrible things are, and then you get back into another round of initiative. Like, kind of it gives you an opportunity to keep things fresh. I think it'd actually be kind of cool.
Next question, related to the above: two-handed weapons, detriment for exhaustion?
Depends.
I would say no.
Yeah, I was gonna say
go ahead.
No. Like, I mean, having a one-handed weapon and I think getting battered with a shield in your hand is going to be just as exhausting, if not more, than like having a two-handed weapon anyway. So like, all of it's going to be terrible.
Yeah. The technique to me with a two-handed weapon is not to like swing it like that. It is to like use the momentum of the weapon itself to do, and that's the case you use with actual swords as well. You're using the weight of the sword and stuff as opposed to like swinging with all of your might, which is. So I feel like it's not going to be any more tiring than a one-handed weapon necessarily.
And also, like, you get these, and you see it in films quite a lot, with people hacking with two-handed weapons quite a lot, when in actuality with swords it's more of a carve, it's more of a controlled swing than you just like hurling yourself at people, because that's how you do get tired.
It's like a two-handed sword.
Heck, a lot of them were used almost like weird like spears in a lot of instances too. Like when you have if you have like a claymore, a lot of it's going to be more like a long distance thrust than it is like barbarian like
holding the blade in your gauntlet as well. So it's like that.
Half swording and all that kind of stuff.
Great swords were used to like break pike formations more than they were used to like actually fight someone. They're too big, like you can't swing that thing quickly. Okay. Two more. Iskloft is in an almost constant state of war. How does the tactics evolve there? They don't. Is the simple answer. They don't. It's the same shit always, forever. It's stuck in this. Well, actually, that's not true. Sodafjord and the Iron Eyes are kind of moving forward a little bit. They're starting to use cavalry. They're starting to get heavier armor, things like that. But overall, it stays the same. And there's a really interesting video from the Nerd Writer who talks about how dragons mean that Game of Thrones has never gone past a certain point of technology. And I think that's really astute. I think that magic would just stunt technological growth big time.
I mean, not to mention a lot of areas of Iskloft are, not exactly wealthy, and it's hard to develop like extreme innovations in combat and like technology if you don't have the means to do so. Like, it makes sense that the South regions are going to be the ones who are making slight advancements, where most people are just not going to have the time or money to like expend into like scientific investigation into war technology.
Yep. There's also no written culture, and there's also like a derision to those who like study as opposed to those who like fight for survival. And like there's like a grudging admirement to like the admiration to the farmers, but then a really like it's admirable to be a grunt, you know, in some ways.
Yeah.
And our final question is, would you be willing to work with the players if they asked for the following mechanic? Two-handed weapons can make a swipe attack, essentially attacking multiple targets with one attack. Absolutely not, would be my answer.
No way.
There's a feat, isn't there? I swear there's a feat that you can...
there used to be a feat called Cleave for previous editions where you would be able to do some splash damage.
If they drop, then you get to attack someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is that in 5th edition as well, which is if you kill someone...
That's a separate attack, though, not like one attack hitting multiple people.
Yeah. With the action economy in 5th edition, it's way too strong to let you attack multiple people. Also, that's not how big weapons work either. Like, you're not going to cut through somebody and hit somebody else.
But magic can attack multiple people. Why can't you do it with a melee weapon?
It's magic. Like,
well, because it's very easy to explain how a fireball can hit 10 people. Like, if you cut somebody with a greatsword, it's going to stick into them. You're going to cut partially into them, and it's going to stop. Like this idea that like a sword will just cleave through. Like the idea that a greatsword can just like cut a person in half without losing any momentum or speed at all. It's just like, that's not a thing. Like, that's not real.
Like a lightsaber.
Yeah, exactly. The lightsaber is like a weapon that actually goes through with no resistance, but a sword is gonna like have to go through a spine, you know? Like, we absolutely fucking smashed that, I think.
2 hours on the dot.
Took no prisoners. We gave them hell. We showed them who's boss. And it's us.
It is. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
That was really cool.
Thanks for having me.
Makes sense as you're basically in all of these games anyway. Like, like we get you in. Any closing thoughts? Anyone?
I'm playing in Mike's game tonight in 1 hour. If you guys want to watch that, it's on Mike the Piper's channel. It's set in Iskloft.
Nice.
With Self Taylor and Nate. It's going to be fun. I'm excited. Watch that, I guess.
Excellent.
Sweet.
Okay. Bye.